enough to make a grown man cry. But not this man. Get back in there, Tia.
Hey guys, welcome back to Rewind Reviews. Today we're going all the way back to the 1980s to look at one of Steven Spielberg's absolute classic movies, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. Released in 1982, the movie sees a troubled child summon the courage to help a friendly alien who's been stranded on Earth to return to his home planet. The film was directed by Steven Spielberg and written by Melissa Matheson and features Henry Thomas, Robert McNaughton, Dee Wallace and Drew Barrymore. It also features the voice talent of Pat Welsh as well as the physical performance of Matthew Demerit and Pat Billon as E.T. This film is one of those all-time classics and it was one of the top choices that I wanted to do for this channel. When it comes to my own history with this movie, I don't know if I would say that I grew up with it. It's one of those movies that I sort of remember being around when I was younger, and I might have watched it when I was quite young, but I can't remember if I did. The movie that I was sort of more familiar with was the 20th anniversary edition, so I never really saw like the original version of it like I did with Star Wars, so I don't really have a memory of like those earlier versions of the film. But with that being said, this was a movie that did start gaining my interest a lot more over the years, and I don't know whether I was in my teens or not when I actually did properly sit down to watch this, but it did really have quite an impact on me, and it was one of those movies that honestly has just stayed with me ever since. I'm thinking of starting an iconic drinking game because I just know that I'm going to say iconic so many times throughout this review, and it's become a bit of a habit that I'm trying to get out of, so yeah, and here comes the first one. This is an absolutely iconic movie. This is one of the most iconic movies ever made. I feel like this is something that the imagery for this film really does stay with you, and I feel like anyone who hasn't even seen the movie at least has an idea of what the movie is. I mean, that shot of Elliott and E.T. going across the moon is probably the most recognisable shot in any movie that's ever been made. There's a lot of debate on what that could actually be, but I honestly would put this within like the top 5 at least, and it's so well known at this point that it's become the logo for Amblin Pictures, which I believe is Steven Spielberg's own company. When it comes to the performances in this movie, there's a very wide variety of people that are integrated into this film because this is very much centred around the kids as well as E.T. But we do get a lot of the parents, we do get a lot of the adult side of things as well, but it's mostly from the kids' perspective. And one of the things I kind of noticed when I was rewatching this is that you don't really see a lot of like the parent or adults' faces. It is mostly the kids. You don't really see any sort of grown-ups outside of like the mum, the agent, there's a little glimpse of the teacher, but that's really it. You don't really see many adults. Everyone else is sort of like off screen or just sort of, you don't really see them that much. And out of the main three, I think probably Michael's probably my favourite character out of the three of them, but honestly I think the standouts are definitely Henry Thomas and Drew Barrymore because they are the kids that kind of drive this forwards, and I feel like they are absolutely brilliant in this movie. I would say they are some of the best child performers I've ever seen. They managed to find a really good balance of sort of being able to sort of keep things real but still sort of embracing like the more larger out there moments, because these do feel like kids. They do feel like kids that you would probably know. You know, they're quite quick to build up their emotions. They're shouting, swearing at each other. Obviously they do feel like proper kids. This definitely feels like the kids that I'm sort of more familiar with, and when you're younger you do kind of latch onto them in a way and you do see the film through their eyes. But as you get older you do start seeing the change a little bit, because you probably won't really notice some of the more subtle things going on, like all the stuff with the parents, because it wasn't something that really sort of registered with me when I was younger, when I first really watched this. But the older I've gotten, the more I've started seeing that, oh, okay, I can suddenly understand a bit more of like the emotional state that these characters are in, purely based on that now that I'm older and I can actually understand this. So I do feel like this is a film that everyone can watch, and I do think that it is something that families will really enjoy. And when I say that these performances are genuinely good, the kid who plays Elliott, he's not really a kid anymore, but Henry Thomas's performance in this film, I've actually seen screen tests of when he was auditioning for the role, and I believe Spielberg sort of gave him like a cue for like, okay, imagine that government are taking the alien away, how would Elliott react in this moment? The way that he does this, and it's very close to what they actually do using the film, it is so believable, and it's so convincing, and it's just raw and emotional, and it's absolutely fantastic, and I think that he is brilliant. And I do have to mention the story with Drew Barrymore as well, because I believe this is one of her first movies, if not her first movie, because she was so young and she hadn't really had much experience within a movie that was like this. When she actually met E.T., the model that they had for him, she was convinced that it was real, so much so that Spielberg basically had to make sure that there was somebody on hand, that there was an animator or somebody around to make sure that he was moving and interacting, because she would keep sneaking off and just talk to him. It's just such a nice thing that Spielberg had done, and it does benefit the movie because she does see him as real, and I feel like she does give it a very real performance. But at the same time, I think that it is just a really nice little story, and I think that it really shows the magic of not only the character but the way that they were making this film. But it is an alien movie, and we do have a few little baddies here and then. Of course, it is the big shadowy organisation, and it's taken almost quite literally for this film, because we don't really see the government as such, because most of the time when they're kind of being built up throughout the film, it's mostly just through shadows or silhouettes in some way, and to me is a literal definition of shadowy organisation. I really do like how they do interact into the movie, how they are integrated into the movie, because you don't really see much of them, just like a few little glimpses here and there until the third act, when they really start to get involved. We get introduced to Agent Keyes, and I really like what they do with his character, because chances are you've probably seen this movie by now, but if you haven't, honestly, watch it. Just go and watch it. When it comes to his role in the movie, I love what they do with him, because it would have been so easy to have had him just be like a moustachy, twirly villain, like, I'm going to take the alien, but they don't do that. They take it in a completely different way, and it's just a case of he is somebody who has wanted to meet an alien, an extraterrestrial, since he was a kid. And that scene between him and Elliott, it's so well done. I love the performances in that moment. I love how it's scripted as well, and I love the way that the characters do interact, because that is what I mean when it says it feels real. Because chances are, like, if you are somebody who does look up to the stars and wonder if there is actually something else out there, more than likely he is going to be quite close to how you would be if you were this close to an extraterrestrial. And I just think that it is handled really well, and I think that the performance is really well done. And then when it comes to E.T. himself, honestly, every single aspect about that character works so well, from the animatronics to the performers to the voiceover. It really adds to this character, and they really managed to find a way of making him, I'd say, quite relatable, because you can understand him, maybe not necessarily everything that he does, but you can see his perspective on things, and I think that it is handled really well. He feels like a kid himself as well, so having Elliott being the one to sort of guide him and sort of teach him a little bit about Earth, it does feel quite natural. I think that the way that E.T. sort of interacts with him and sees the world, it is quite believable, and I really like the direction that they do go with it, because I like the way that he does seem genuinely quite curious about stuff, and like that scene where he's just sort of left in the house alone and he just goes exploring and he just starts just causing absolute havoc, and it does feel very genuine, and honestly it just adds to the charm of this film. Matthew Demerit was actually one of the performers in actually wearing an E.T. suit, and at the time he was a 12-year-old kid, so that does sort of lend to me saying that I feel like E.T. sort of feels quite childlike. Apparently the actor was he was born without legs, and he gets around on his hands, and that's sort of the reason why E.T. sort of has that sort of waddle to him. What they were able to do is incredible, and I think that Matthew is absolutely fantastic. It is really hard trying to operate around a suit like that. It feels very real, it feels genuine, it really does work quite well, and I think that that physical performance that Matthew gives is incredible. We also have Michael Billen, who was a 2'10" actor who was around in the US and very sadly passed away not long after the movie was released in 1983. Again, similarly to Matthew, I think that what he was able to do with the role, they really do bring this character to life in a way that I don't think that just having it being animatronics could ever do. Even though the animatronics are really good and they do manage to bring a lot of the expressions to life, and I think the way that the neck's able to sort of extend, and like they really do bring a lot of emotion to who E.T. is, but you can only sort of go so far with that, and I feel like having the human element to it and having both Matthew and Michael being a part of that really does help benefit that. Of course we've got Pat Welsh as well, who provided the voice for E.T. Again, it does feel quite natural, it does feel like it is very much in character, and I like how it is something that he's able to sort of pick up over time, that he can't speak at all early on in the film, but then eventually he starts like picking up little things here and there, and I like that that's the thing that him and Drew Barrymore's character kind of bond over. He starts sort of learning little bits of English here and there, and of course it's kind of stilted, and he's still sort of like, it's more just like singular words and phrases, and that sort of builds up over time. And I think the voice direction that they went with it, as well as how the voice is actually utilised, it works really well, and it does make it a lot more believable. And then when it comes to the design of them as well, I feel like it is absolutely fantastic design. It does sort of feel like it sort of harkens back to like a few like the older interpretations of Aliens, but it's been sort of brought into like a bit more of a modern era, or like the 80s modern era. So it feels like a really good combination of different elements that we would have seen over the years. So it does sort of feel like it does sort of have a history with Earth in a way, because you do see them coming down to Earth and having a little look around, so maybe they would have interacted with people in the past. But honestly, I think it is a genuinely really fantastic design. It's very, I do want to say unique, because we haven't really seen aliens like that around about the time, because most of the ones that we were sort of getting were like really scary ones. So having a more friendlier version of an extraterrestrial, and having, I honestly think that he does look quite friendly. I know some people do find him a bit scary, and I think that's kind of understandable, but I do get more of a warm, pleasant vibe whenever I see E.T., and I think that it is a very interesting design. I think that it's so well known that honestly I would struggle to find somebody who didn't know who E.T. was. And one of the reasons why I'm really sort of praising more the character work than anything else is because this is a very character driven movie. It's completely focused on more the friendship rather than like this big overarching story, and that does work very well. That's one of the reasons why I feel like it's something that really does connect with people, because it is completely built around the characters and their emotions and what they're going through, rather than just, you know, going through emotions and plot beat after plot beat and things like that. It does have that sort of structure to it. It does have a few little elements that you might have seen before, but I feel like this is really the ones that really sort of perfected it, to the point where there's a lot of newer things that have sort of come out over the years that do have a lot of elements that sort of go back to this in a way. Things like Stranger Things, and even things like Bumblebee as well, which basically ripped off E.T. in multiple moments, even though I really like that movie. But there are definitely a lot of elements of that film that came from E.T., and I feel like that really does cement just how well known this movie is and how much of an influence it has been. And because the story's so simple and easy to follow, it is something that I feel like people of all ages can get on board with and understand very well. The only thing that I think younger people won't really understand a lot is more like the emotional backstory, and I feel like that is something that will sort of come to you more over time. The older that you get, you will start noticing these things, but other than that, this is something that I feel like everybody can enjoy and understand no problem. The heart of this movie is through Elliott and E.T. and their connection and their friendship that develops over the course of this movie. It is done really well. It's so well told, and the performances and everything, it really does work so well, and I really do like the connection and the relationship that those two develop over the movie, to the point where I don't know a single person who can actually get through the movie and not shed a single tear. There is one thing that I'm so confused on, even now. I'm not 100% sure on why they do this, even though I do like this scene, so I'm not against this in any way, but it's just something that I feel like they might have explained in some way and they just don't. And that's the way that they sort of have like an emotional connection. Well, it's not really an emotional connection. Basically, like, E.T.'s kind of like latched onto Elliott, and I think it's because like it feels safe around him, but it's the way that Elliott sort of experiences the exact same stuff that E.T. does. It's like all the emotions that he's feeling, they both share it at the same time, to the point where like when E.T.'s running around the house and he's getting drunk, and then Elliott's off in school, and then he starts feeling the effects of it and he starts getting a bit woozy. And it is a really fun scene. I do like how it is done. It's just something that I would have liked to have seen explained in some way. It doesn't necessarily need to be explained. I do have really conflicting opinions on this one, as you can probably tell. I do like what they did with it. I just wanted a bit more of an idea of why it is that this happened. Because that sort of brings me on to my next question. This is definitely a sci-fi movie, but I would honestly say it's tilting more towards a fantasy than anything else, because it does have more fantastical elements rather than science fiction. It does have a lot of science fiction elements with E.T. and spaceships and things like that, but there is a lot more of a fantasy element to it as well, and it really depends on the viewer, and I feel like it's probably going to be based more on how you feel about the movie. So I would say it's a sci-fi fantasy along the lines of something like a Star Wars thing, where it does have those science fiction elements to it, but it's not scientifically accurate. It definitely relies a lot more on the fantasy element. And I think a little part of that actually comes from the overall look of this movie, because there is kind of like a misty sort of look to it, and especially like a lot of the lighting for it as well, because it does feel quite reminiscent of like a lot of those earlier alien invasion stories, where you'd have like the door open up and then like all the light comes flooding out, and then there's like scenes of like Elliott standing outside the shed and the same lighting's there, or the way that he's in his bedroom and that light's just like bleeding through into the room. Honestly, this is a beautiful looking movie. I really love how it is shot. I love a lot of the angles that they use for this, because it really does help sort of show the environment that they're in, and it really does take a lot of advantage of the overall look and aesthetics. When it comes to the effects for this movie, this is going to be quite hard for me to really sort of talk about, because as I said, the version that I'm most familiar with is the 20th anniversary re-release edition, and it's very similar to what they did with the Star Wars original trilogy, where there's a few little extra things that they added in, a few little CGI effects to sort of add into it. When it comes to the more practical effects, I still think they look really good. They do hold up really well, and I think that because of the way that the movie's shot and the way that people interact with E.T. and the way that a few of the other little effects, like the passing the moon and the sun, they do still look pretty good, and I do think that they do hold up really well. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here. I don't think the new effects actually look too bad. They are noticeable, and you can tell when it does become the CG version, but I do think that they are integrated a lot better than things that we've seen in the past, like Star Wars. They're used quite sparingly, and I think that it's more to sort of add like a little bit more personality to what E.T.'s doing at any sort of given moment. It does work for me. I do think that it should have been left alone, but at the same time, I don't mind necessarily what it is that they did sort of add into it. But I know a lot of people do feel a little bit iffy about it, and it is completely understandable, and I do get that. I'm just sort of coming more from my perspective of the movie. The one thing that I am a little bit confused on is during the final chase sequence, which is absolutely incredible. I absolutely love that sequence. For some reason, they've decided to change all the agents all holding shotguns in the original version. and they've swapped them for walkie-talkies, and I don't understand that change at all, because apparently Steven Spielberg said, or it might have been Spielberg, it might have been somebody else, I'm not quite sure on the overall details, but they basically said that the guns might scare the kids, so they decided to edit them out and give them walkie-talkies. And this is like 15 minutes after what is a pretty traumatising sequence with the astronauts and E.T. potentially dying and all sorts of, and that's the thing that scares the kids. It doesn't make any sense, but yeah, most of the things that they have changed and tweaked and all that, I don't mind. That is one thing that I think that honestly they didn't need to do. And since I mentioned Star Wars, I do have to bring up the George Lucas thing that I've heard about. What happens in this movie is there's a sequence where it takes place over Halloween, and Elliott and his brother both try sneaking E.T. out of the house. There's a scene when they're walking up the street and Yoda walks up to them, a kid dressed up as Yoda, and E.T. seems to sort of like recognise him, and he starts like walking towards him, going, home. And apparently George Lucas wasn't actually aware that this was going to be in the movie, and Spielberg invited him along to see the film. And he says, there's a little something in here for you, and he got a bit of a surprise when he saw that. And it wasn't until years later, when the prequels were being released to Phantom Menace, that George Lucas kind of got his own back a little bit by having several E.T. creatures in the background during one of the Senate meetings. Even though it's not true, it has kind of built up a bit of a fan theory that maybe E.T. might be a Jedi, because he does have similar powers, he can make things float, he does have a few psychic abilities. It does make sense, and I do like that little fan theory that has come up, even though it is just like a little bit of a joke between George Lucas and Spielberg. Since I mentioned the bike scene, because I do need to sort of talk about it a little bit, I do think that there's not a lot of like action in this movie, and I think that this is like one of the only like proper action-y sort of sequences in the film, because it is a proper chase, and it is handled really well, it is shot really well. I do think the stunts that they have are very believable, with it just being kids, and the way that they're kind of outsmarting the agents, and it is just a really great sequence, and it is one of the most memorable moments of this movie. And when it comes to the music, this is one of John Williams' best. I don't know if this is the best one he's come up with, because there's a couple that I probably would say are a little bit higher than this, and I'll probably get around to those eventually. But honestly, I would say this is definitely in like the top 5 at least. I think this is definitely a John Williams special. The soundtrack for this movie is so well known, it is so iconic. I absolutely love it. It's got the really big grand John Williams moments to it, and like the theme. I would struggle to find somebody who doesn't know that theme, but you might not necessarily know exactly what it's from, because John Williams does have a few different themes that do have sort of like a similar vibe, so you could get a little mixed up here and there between them, because they do have a similar sort of vibe to them. This one does sound unique enough that I feel like this could be more recognisable than many other ones that he has done. And I have to mention though, when I was like rewatching this like way back years ago, my memory wasn't really that good of it. That's kind of why I'm saying I'm not sure when it is that I actually watched this movie, because I remember seeing it when I must have been like 10 or 11, I might have been a little older than that, I'm not sure. The opening title started playing with just like the logo just sort of like fading in and out, and they've got that little like sound track to it, and it's really creepy and eerie, and like I just remember thinking at that moment, I'm sure this is supposed to be a nice movie, I'm getting a bit creeped out now. And it is a really strange moment to have, considering like how nice and heartwarming this film is, because it really does build up like this mystery and a little bit of suspense, but that's all there really is, because the rest of it is really nice and fun and friendly, and it is an odd little decision for them to have, but I do like that, and it does get you interested, because you are invested enough that you will be like, okay, I'm kind of interested to see where this is going, because it does build up that mystery, and it does get you to basically want to see it. And I said it earlier and I'll say it again, that shot with Elliott and E.T. going past the moon with that soundtrack from John Williams, that to me is cinema. That is one of the most iconic images in cinema history. It was a huge movie when it came out. It was a big success. I think there was a big problem with like the merchandise and the toys and all sorts when it came out. So much so, as you can probably guess, that yes, there were plans for a sequel to be made, and it was kind of going to go into like the backstory of E.T. We were going to find out what his name was and all sorts. It's all available on the internet. I believe there was a tie-in book as well which sort of goes into it, and it is interesting. It is worth looking into. It's way too much info for me to really get into on here without sort of just blasting past like a 30-minute mark, so I'm trying to keep these a bit shorter. So honestly, it is worth looking into, and I do think it is an interesting concept that they were sort of toying with, but I just don't think that it's the direction that they should have gone with, and I'm so happy that they have just left this as its own movie. And overall, I think that this is a definitive Steven Spielberg movie. This has all the hallmarks that he has been known for over the years. I feel like this is kind of where he really found a lot of his footing. Like, this is the one that really cemented him as the go-to filmmaker. Jaws put him on the map, but this is the film that to me made him Steven Spielberg. This is an absolutely fantastic movie, and I don't feel like it has aged that much. I feel like this is something that everyone can watch and enjoy. The performances, the music, the editing, the look, the lighting, the animatronics, the animation, all of it works so well. It is so well constructed, this movie. It is such a heartwarming experience as well. It's a really emotional movie that honestly, you have to watch this. If you have never seen this movie, you have got to see it. This is a must-see movie, so I'm telling you, go and see it. This isn't a movie that I grew up with, as I said, but it is a movie that has resonated with me, and I think even rewatching it however many times I've seen it over the years, it still brings a tear to your eye. And whether that's a mixture of nostalgia or just pure emotion, it really does hit you in the feels. And honestly, have some tissues on hand when you're watching this. And even though I did have my little nitpicky thing here and there, it honestly, that stuff doesn't bother me at all, because I feel like it does work very well for this movie. It doesn't make me sort of like question things or just sort of think like, oh, I don't really understand this and I don't really know that. Oh, I'm probably will do that from time to time. I know the one that the next video coming out, there is one thing that I do mention, and I'm not sure if people are going to be happy with it. When it comes to this movie, honestly, I can't think of anything that I would want to change or anything that's like wrong with it or anything in any way, shape or form. And for that reason, my rating for this movie, easily a 10 out of 10. This is definitely one of my all-time favourite movies, and honestly it is one that I really wanted to do for this channel, so I've done it, it's over, and there's a lot more stuff that's going to be coming out soon, so keep an eye out for those. So that's all I've got to say for today's episode, so thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know any movies that you want me to take a look at and do a review for in the future. You can also follow me on Facebook at rewindreviews.youtube, where I basically just do like a few little updates here and there, and I'll just like post out little trailers and tidbits and things like that. But if you want to keep up to date on everything that's going on this channel, make sure you hit the notification button to actually keep up to date on everything that actually is going on here. Also, let me know what you thought about the movie. Did you like it? Did you not? Is there any sort of complaints that you have about it? Where would you sort of rank this in terms of the Steven Spielberg movies? Honestly, let me know your thoughts down below, and honestly that's all I've really got to say. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.